guitar pedal nerds. And again, we're not looking at a guitar. So what the fuck are you doing here? I know what you're doing here. Because some of you might be into this type of music that whenever I say it, by now I have to do a certain thing that I'm going to be extremely embarrassed to do. But there's no fucking way around this. Because we're talking to Dave Ellefson from Megadeth. And the kind of music they play, excuse me, I really hope he doesn't leave. It is... I have to do it. I'm sorry, I have to. Every time I do a metal pedal, they expect it. Yes, I know!
I've played really loud before, now I'm deaf.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They expect it. I've done it once, and now, every time the metal, I said it, every time the pedal does metal, I gotta do this. So there you have it. Dave Ellefson, we're gonna talk about, not so much about pedals, do you use pedals?
I do. I've just started using an MXR distortion, stereo chorus, and a Jim Dunlop
Give me one second.
guitar pedal.
Where did the mic go? I think you got the mic inside.
Okay.
Yeah, pedals. I asked you about pedals.
Pedals, okay. I use an MXR when I use pedals, and I don't usually that much. With Megadeth, I use only a chorus pedal for just beginning intros of songs like Poison Was the Cure on Dawn Patrol. I use it, but when I do some solo bass things and clinics and stuff like that, I usually use an MXR distortion, bass distortion, so you kind of keep the bottom end in it, and then also MXR stereo chorus and a Jim Dunlop guitar wah. What I find with the guitar wah, when for soloing purposes, when you're playing in a band, you kind of dial your tone to be a bass player, and then when you go up into some solo registers, in order to get those notes to pop out, the Jim Dunlop guitar wah actually lifts the whole frequency up, because all a wah-wah is just it's a mid-range knob, is basically all
it's got to be the right range.
Yeah, so I find the guitar one kind of lifts the bass up over the mix, so you can play licks, and then when you come off of it, it drops the bass back down into the bass register.
Because if you play a bass wah, it's probably more for the lower registers, and not for solo purposes.
Yeah, and the bass wah is really good if you're tracking you really want a nice bass, an actual wah-wah part. I find on records, it works really well, because it keeps the bass down in the register that it should be, and you can kind of get that nice swampy, wah-wah effect. So the bass wah records well, the guitar wah is better for live.
So pretty straightforward, laid-back setup, but primarily a more complex when you play other things other than that.
Yeah, to me, I don't use any compressors or any of that stuff. front of house and through the PA system, of course, they put whatever limiters and compression on it to, kind of keep everything in context of the mix. But for me on stage, I want to tell the bass what to do. I don't like my rig telling me what I can and can't do. So for me, I keep it just straight into a Shure wireless, into the amp. I side chain the chorus pedal, and the radio DIs, they sound great, and that's it. Straight into the cabinet. I use usually a Shure 57 on the cabinet and a DI into the house. It's super simple, man. Yeah, don't complicate it. Those frequencies are as big as they are, you can't mess with them. So.
And you got two guitar players. You don't want to take away, you don't want to hit your fuzz pedal when you have two guitar players going.
Well, in Megadeth, our tones and our sound is in how we execute the riffs and the performance. A lot of it's in the palm muting. A lot of it's in this hand, and it's funny because we spend a lot of time growing up as beginning players, spending a lot of time on the notes, because we think that's where the music comes from, and that's part of it. But your signature sound comes from the hand you sign your signature.
And when you play with a pick, even the slightest angle will make a difference.
Yep, exactly. So strap length, fingers or pick, all those things will have a huge. That's really where your signature sound comes from the hand that you signed your name with, which is usually the hand that we're plucking and picking and striking the instrument with. So that's the hand that really is it's your sound.
So to you bass players who are watching, I don't know how many they are, plug into the amp, let your fingers do the talking. But that's enough about gear. Now the stuff I want to know, which is about the notes, which is really essentially what you should be concerned with, and not how much dB your compressor takes. That's bullshit. Let's think about the notes, and I'm interested in the notes. Because primarily I want to study this arranging. I see the notes, and I'm always interested in the process, which of course, you see guys on stage, I don't see the process. And I like how the pieces of the puzzle come together. I gotta confess, as far as me and Megadeth goes, I'm a middle of the road Megadether, which means I never really, I don't think I heard them or have them, the early albums. My ex-girlfriend always gave me shit about that. You gotta listen to this and this, but I really like these. So there was a summer when Euthanasia came out, and I built a pond in the backyard. Opened my window, I think I was 19, and that was blasting for 2 weeks while I was digging that pond.
Nice.
And my elderly neighbors hated the living guts out of me. It was bad, but...
Making friends, are you?
Yes, but I was digging that pond, blasting Euthanasia for 2 weeks, and that's so... And all the 3, 4, 5 albums that came after that, that was like my time, and then I got into other stuff and kind of lost track. But I was huge into that, and that was actually my first step into the M word. That and Metallica's Black Album. And that was my first step into, okay, so this is why people like metal, and I really got into it. But I'm interested in your role when it comes to the songwriting. You're credited on a whole bunch of the songs. And when I've got metal bands in the studio, oh, I'm dying. A lot of them come and they have great riffs. Riff, and that's it. There's no chord progression, there's no form, and the only thing you can do over a busy riff, which could be really cool, really powerful, is scream. You can maybe do something rhythmic, but there's no place for melody for the vocals. And then I've got other bands that come in. They've got moving around power chords, no riff, and great song, but it's that riff aspect is missing. So I rarely have that balance. And with Megadeth, I think that is the perfect balance between I play the riff and I kind of palm mute an arpeggio here, but then I also have that chord structure that allows Dave to do the melodic aspects, especially on Euthanasia. All the verses are very riff-based, very rhythmic singing, and then pre-chorus comes in and you've got the melody kind of taking off, and then the chorus comes in and here's the big melody, and then back to the riffing. So I think you guys nail that balancing act between metal riffing, which you need, but still keeping the chords. How much do you take the chord work into account?
Well, most of those songs start, and I think this is the case in most metal music, most of the records that I played on, it usually starts with a riff. That's, and a riff, the riff is to metal what a chord changes to jazz.
Yes.
Right? And within a riff, you can have key changes. You can have certainly a whole melodic center that shifts.
If you do it well.
Well, just even if you do it poorly, you have these elements within a riff. Sometimes they're pentatonic, sometimes they're minor, they're major, sometimes they get into diminished. There's all these different little nuances within a riff, and really any riff is legal, musically. But you're right. The trick is how can you how can you put melody over top of it, whether it's a guitar, even I listen to the solos, that the guitar players throughout Megadeth's history have played, and to hear how they shift within a riff and really almost changing keys sometimes within a progression is it's incredible, to see how that works. And of course, guitar players can bend notes, which helps get in and out of different transitions. But yeah, to put melody, I noticed it right away with Megadeth when we did "Killing Is My Business," our first record. I noticed that, we got in the studio and you could really hear everything. It was like, man, the vocal melodies were very well constructed. You can remember them. They were hooky. And especially over these very gnarly riffs that we were playing at very fast tempos. And to me, that's, again, most people are going to listen to that vocal melody. I agree with you that metal music often is just a pile of riffs. And you're kind of like, All right, great part, great part, great part. The song, maybe not so much. And I think what you just mentioned, Euthanasia, you mentioned Talk is Black album. I think those of us, it took a few records to develop our sound, and then you sort of hit this stride where you figured out, like, this is the best of the riffing, the best of the melody, and the best of the composition. And we started to really, hit that stride by the early and mid-90s for sure.
Do you sit there like in the studio and one of you goes, way cool, but too much riffing, we need to go and take it somewhere now?
Well, one song in particular, that 99 Ways to Die, which was a one-off that we did for Beavis and Butthead movie as a soundtrack song. And the riff is really complicated. And I was just watching Dave play it, and I'm thinking, man, how are we going to get a vocal melody over that? And somehow, that's really a craft that he has, that he's really perfected, is playing these really complex riffs, even during the verse, because usually during the verse, that's when things kind of lay out, you kind of hit power chords, but in Megadeth, Dave is very complex on the riffing, and then being able to drop a nice melody over top of it, and of course to do them both at the same time.
Yeah,
the execution's a whole other thing, that's skill set that he has, but to write like that and to hear that it's very, very cool. I mean, it harkens back to Geddy Lee from Rush. These people that just have that that innate ability to be able to do that, because you're really kind of doing two totally separate tasks, and not to make it get too progressive that it goes out of the mainstream. So I think 99 Ways to Die was definitely that one song where I really noticed that. And you just kind of let it develop, and as it develops, and of course working with good producers helps, because producers are there to not only help bring the best out of a band, but sometimes be able to sort of massage and kind of move things around and offer ideas. And today, in the digital age, you can sort of grab things and fly them around, in Pro Tools and stuff, and you can try things without destructively destroying, your basic tracks.
Back then it was you worked in Nashville with Dan Huff, right?
Yeah, the particular that period I'm talking about was actually Max Norman, which was right before that. But you're right. Then we did go down to Nashville with Dan Huff,
which I was like, who came up with that idea? I mean, big respect for the guy.
Yeah.
But I thought possibly a kind of maybe fish out of water, and let's just get a totally different perspective.
Well, here's
mix it up a little bit.
Here's how it happened. Ironically, we were on the Euthanasia tour. Corrosion of Conformity was our support act, and we went through a management change. And actually, COC's manager became our manager. His partner, Bud Prager, had worked with groups like Foreigner, and had been was an older guy, a long time in the business. And really, it's funny because we were talking about who to produce, and Dave and I. In particular, we're talking about how great the guitar tone was on the Giant record, right? Which is enough guitar tone, right? And we're going, man, that guitar playing is the playing's great, of course, but the tone was awesome. It turns out, Bud Prager, one of the management partners, said, "Yeah, I used to manage Giant, and I used to manage Dan. I know Dan. He's just moved to Nashville. He's been part of this kind of new country thing."
He does a lot of modern country albums.
It went from, in LA, the whole 80s Madonna, Michael Jackson, all that kind of stuff, all that music had really shifted, and the town had kind of dried up. So a lot of those guys like Dan Huff and the Giant was basically a kind of a following in the footsteps of like Toto. The Toto guys were
all session players.
By day job were session players, and then they formed the group, and Giant was the same thing. And so then that all kind of disbanded, but they all moved to Nashville. So Dan was he'd been doing very well as a session guitar player, was just starting to get into producing. And he had produced one country act called Lone Star, which was starting to get quite popular.
Got 4 albums.
Yeah, and so then we went in and we did Cryptic Writings, and Cryptic was by far the first rock metal record Dan had ever done. It was only his second production job he'd ever done. And in fact, after we'd get done tracking, he'd run over and play on a session because he hadn't quite made the full transition.
And he's sitting in Nashville trying to get country jobs, saying, "Produce Megadeth." I mean, come on, that's a good reference, right?
Well, and it's funny because Megadeth going into Nashville, because we could all play well, and we were a pretty popular band, of course, but we were really earned the respect of the Nashville players, because that town, if you're in that town, you can play. if you can't play, you don't get let into town.
No.
You know, and so there was a really incredible respect level down there that. And we made friends with a lot of course, Dan's buddies, you know, that were some of the guys from Giant and whatnot. But you know, so that's how that whole transition happened.
Okay.
And it was just great. And you know, Cryptic Writings was an absolute success, not just commercially, but for us musically. I mean, it's you know songs like Trust, you know, just incredible, you know, and even some other things like Disintegrators and these kind of tunes that are on there.
It's very interesting because you're just saying those titles, and I haven't listened into that album in I would say 15 years at least. You say the titles, and I can hear Dave sing them. So I mean,
right.
So there's something to the poppy quality to these songs. I mean, if they pop in, that's not a bad pop is not a bad word. You know, if they come into your head, you know they will.
Yeah,
15
you
years
can remember.
later.
You know, that was just somebody was just asking me in an interview about the Risk album. Certainly one of the most controversial records in the Megadeth catalog, and you know that was the second record then that we did with Dan Huff, and things had really changed in his world. And Maggie told me, he goes, "Look, I can't even afford to take the time out to make a rock record. Rock records take 3, 4, 5 months." He goes, "We make country records in 6 weeks. You know, let's say musicians. There's kind of a machine of how they do it."
Yeah.
And you know, Dan was really on the upswing with his career, and he's getting called a lot to make a lot of big records. And so it was, you know, kind of, you know, closed the door for us on doing any more work in Nashville for quite a few years. But you know, it's funny that record. You know, like you said, you got into Megadeth at Euthanasia. You know, 10 years into our career, but because of your age, that was when you entered in. You know, there's a lot of people who. I remember I got a fan. Facebook thing or something. Someone said, you know, why do you guys always, you know, not talk favorably about Risk? And you know, that was my first Megadeth record I ever got. I was 9 years old, and you know, changed my life, and I loved it. And I tell you, that was a wake up call for me. It made me realize, first of all, don't ever, just because maybe certain fans didn't like it, shouldn't change our opinion of it. Because I remember.
Just what I told him on the way here. We talked exactly about this.
Yeah, and I remember getting on the airplane. Dave, we were flying off to a show. And Dave had the mixes, and I sat in the airplane listening to the mixes, and I went, this is an awesome album. And I go, you know, I hope the fans like it, because it's not a thrash record. It was an interesting time because these groups, new metal bands like Disturbed and Godsmack and all these bands were coming on the scene. And as one manager put it, you know, we zigged and they all zagged. And that's where, you know, the Risk record was very different sound for what was happening with all the other metal bands. And of course our fans that have our early records want to hear all the, you know, ripping, Wake Up Dead and Black Friday and all that stuff. And I get it. But, you know, it was where we went with it. And, you know, it made me realize too, first of all, don't ever disrespect your own work, you know, which kind of was like, okay, good. What I heard on the airplane, you know, those were good songs. It was a really well-made record. It was a challenging record because, you know, I remember sitting there, you know, writing bass parts, just going, man, this is like I haven't done bass lines like this, you know, especially in Megadeth. I mean, it was a very different approach. The songs were very different, and I tell you, you know, it was a challenge on a lot of levels making that record. But you know, years later, I would have an experience on a rock and roll fantasy camp tour where I was out with Mark Hudson and, you know, older guys. Kelly Keegan from Night Ranger, and I was, you know, kind of the token metal guy, you know. And because I played, you know, pretty well in a lot of different styles, I could, you know, kind of handle that kind of gig. But, you know, I didn't, you know, you know, at the age I was, you know, 10, 15 years younger than some of these guys, and up there on the bandstand calling out Beatles tunes and Booker T and the MGs, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I think it's in G, all right, I heard it on the radio, I'm going to take the shot. It was an F, okay, good, you know, and I'm just literally making up the lines as I'm on stage in front of an audience, and I remember there was a moment where, you know, Mark Hudson was, you know, he was like not happy with me because I didn't know these tunes, you know, and I'm just sitting there going, dude, you know, I've had record deals since I've been 19 years old. I've always been in, you know, an original band that wrote our own songs, and you know, but it was a wake-up call to me because we had a tour that we did, Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp tour we did after that, and I really it made my my goal was to earn Mark's respect. You know, I mean, Mark had written big songs for Aerosmith, Living on the Edge, and I grew up as a kid watching him on TV. It was a Saturday morning TV show, the Hudson Brothers. But it made me realize, I was, by the time I got in, I was born in 1964. The Beatles, formed 63, 64, or at least when their first records came out. And I missed the Beatles. I mean, just because of my age. They were done and over, and they weren't on the radio a whole lot until many years later. Of course, now Beatles and Zepp are on the radio all the time.
Sure.
You can't. But, the Beatles it was just because of the year I was born, man, it's just that kind of pushed through. And by the time I was getting into music, Zeppelin and the Who were almost done. Their drummers died, the Zepp.
How do you think we feel?
I know.
Yeah. Everyone's like, what, you're not a big fan of Hendrix and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin? I'm like, well, I have respect for them, and I really think their craft and what they've done in the. I don't think I'm sorry, Jimmy. I don't think Jimmy Page was a great player back then, but he was innovative and he was
right.
He did things no one else did. But emotionally, you're attached to the music you grew up with.
Absolutely.
And I can listen to the Beatles and I appreciate it and respect it for what they've done. And Hendrix, holy crap, of course, but I wasn't there. And it doesn't do anything for me emotionally.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Because again, for me, Kiss, and guys who grew up on the Beatles, I mean, dude, Kiss, really? Come on, Even though the Kiss guys, they'd be the first ones to acknowledge the Beatles were their biggest influences, And, but what that experience showed me from the fantasy camp is I really spent a month going back, digging into Beatles tunes, digging into really kind of oldies, classic rock stuff, and going back and really studying and getting deep into it. And it was cool. I go, wow, it's so funny that they do that, because that's when I was going up, Cheap Trick did. Oh, Cheap Trick got that from them. Okay. You know what I mean? You start to get the correlation.
I listened to Satriani, and then I find out later, he was doing Hendrix.
Right. I think Steve Clark from Def Leppard had the quote that if you want to be as good as your idol, go listen to what your idol grew up on, because then you kind of get the thread. But the truth of it is, it's not about us being like our idols. Our idols are our influence. It's about us doing something new for the next generation moving forward.
I've personally never been into learning licks or solos from famous guitar players. I do have the Euthanasia songbook, and I tried a couple of riffs, but I was never interested in I want to learn the whole song.
Yeah.
I was like,
it depends if you have the piano book.
No.
I had a Kiss Destroyer piano book, and I'm
Why
trying to
do
play
that?
bass and going, that's not. I'm sorry, that is not.
You really want to play Train of Consequences on a piano? What the?
Exactly.
But
the piano and vocal.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I actually had the tab and spent some time, especially on that riff. That is just crazy. But I was never into. I want to learn the whole song. I was like, I want to get into your head and find out how do you approach it. But I'm a arranger, producer. I said that in every single interview. I like putting the pieces together, and for that I want to know what pieces do you use, and then go and try to do Megadeth song.
Right. Well, the Megadeth stuff's very complex. It's interesting. These last few months, I've been actually doing some producing again. It's hard to, as you're in the studio, that kind of becomes your world. You become known in that world. And for, those of us who are, traveling the world, touring and stuff, it's hard to do both. And it's kind of, because I've had most of this last year, Megadeth hasn't been on tour, so it's kind of opened up some opportunities for it. And, one of the things I find, I end up, usually working with younger artists, which I enjoy, because there's kind of a mentorship thing that goes on with that you realize it's like, man, all this experience that I've had, I can help take in, sometimes just simple things like, what, let's try getting your hands up a little tighter on the fingerboard. Let's fret a little better.
Yes.
Yeah, let's move your hand back. Let's kind of tighten that little bit up, or even drumming and stuff. It's like
you teach arranging, harmony. You teach the bass. You teach guitar.
Yeah, you become kind of a professor. It's often a psychiatrist.
Especially if everyone's in the room, don't do that. Don't have the whole band in the room at the same time with a drummer backseat producing.
Yeah.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, and there's times when you need to just clear the room, me and the drummer.
Sometimes I really need to do that. But I had this band a rock metal band that didn't quite have their direction. So it ended up to be a little bit of Motorhead and a little bit of Nickelback. And a little bit of, all this, and then they said, well, we really want this to be Megadethy, if that's a word, Megadethy.
Megadethy.
Yeah, probably.
Probably a word.
It's an adjective.
Yeah.
I wanted Megadethy.
Is that EY or just the Y on the end, or an I?
Just the Y. Just the Y. Hyphen Y.
Okay.
Okay. Good that we talked about that. And I'm pretty good at analyzing the elements of a song and what it takes. So we sat there and we made it as Megadeth as it could be.
Okay.
Dave's voice was missing, but still. And they were happy. It was in that direction.
That's all we say for 2,000 years until this day. We'll question state.
Well, but the whole album is it's a great album, but it's of course very there isn't a red line going through it. It's pulling you in
Right.
different metal directions. But they were in a finding themselves process.
Right.
What I
That happens a lot too. You get groups that really come together and connect, and really can have the charisma. That's a big part of it. People ask me a lot of times, what is that thing? And it's charisma. It's charisma through your performance, through your playing. And when 4 or 5 people can come together and form a group and have that charisma, that's the thing that as a producer that is needed to capture. How do we capture that without changing it, without altering it too much, maybe try to perfect it and make it better. But I tell you what, I have learned more in my studio experiences than probably anywhere else. And as a young player, we need to practice. We need to learn all the different dynamics and aspects of playing. But in the studio is really where, because everything's under the microscope of the microphone.
Yes.
And you can really hear it. How well do I play in time? Am I pushing? Am I pulling?
He's not just said that. He's like, live, I don't care, but in the studio I got to do it 15 times to get that string not to ring along. Stuff
And live is a whole other thing. It's funny. I was speaking to people here at the camp about that. About Bobby Vega has this great line. He says, "What's the difference between a good solo and a great solo?" About 10 feet. Meaning the guy that's back by his amp going, "I need to hear my tone," versus the guy that's out front killing it, and being Ted Nugent.
Live, it's all about attitude and just,
Exactly.
if you play something wrong, really, who cares? I always tell guitar.
There's a forgiveness factor in the
Yeah,
live
I always
set.
tell guitar players that they go and buy the super expensive guitar and all the detail and the patch cables. Say, dude, if you are hurt at all, if people can hear the guitar, you're good.
Yeah.
Be out there, make sure your outfit works and all this stuff. Couple more questions. One, which I was asking myself this morning as we were listening again to Euthanasia. I hear you doing a lot of pedal tone stuff. So there's riffing going on top and certain things, but you just stick to that note. And if I had the bass in my hand, I'd be like, okay, I want to hit that a little bit. I want to hit that. Does that? Are you restricting yourself? Is that work for you, or does it come naturally to just say, let the guitars do their thing? I'm doing the fundamental thing that's necessary here.
Well, when we formed the band, we had this saying that everybody was a lead instrument, lead guitar, lead bass, lead drums, lead vocal. Right? Man, that's why those early records are so. There's a lot of ripping and shredding, but there's a time when. There's a defining moment. We were in Rome, Italy, and we were playing this big dome arena, right? We would always get there early and we would sound check. And during sound check, we'd write songs. I think it was actually on the Euthanasia tour. So we were writing songs that would become cryptic writings. And Dave started chunking away on a riff. Nick jumped in and started playing a groove. And all of a sudden, like, the lady who's making the popcorn looks over and goes, and she's like grooving, There's a guy literally sweeping the floor, and all of a sudden he's like,
you got it.
and all of a sudden, and I remember saying to him, I said, dude, did you see that? And Dave was really kind of into the riff, so he wasn't, and I think his back turned to the front house. So he was kind of intense on it. But I was standing facing out with Dave here and Nick here playing, and I'm watching it, and I'm just going, dude, this is a really rad riff we're in right now, and you can see. These people aren't Megadeth fans, they're just working the arena that night, And so if the non-Megadeth fan can get behind it, it's like, wow. And that was really a changing moment for me, because you can get so caught up in your own little world, but it's like, you know what, pull your head up, and you know, I say this to the campers here, you know, at this camp, that, you know, it's so common to just get into our little world, but it's like, you know what, pull your head up and see what's going on out here, you know, and read the room, man, you know, and even with set lists and bands that are playing, you know, if it's sometimes if when a show's not working, a couple of tweaks to rearranging some songs to keep the energy moving, to create,
very
you know, those little things like that can really alter the performance. You don't sometimes have to throw the whole thing out, just tweak it, move it around a little bit.
Because when I think of metal's very difficult to keep the bass. I mean, bass can be amazing in terms of independence. You keep a bass note going, you've got a third in the bass, and you can do a lot. And I very frequently take the last chorus and just change the bass notes. As long as the guitars are not really low, which sadly in metal they often are, and you have low interval limit problems, you can just keep the guitar parts exactly the same, and a single bass note can give it a different feel. The vocal melody can be the same, and just the bass notes can be magical. But
well, in Megadeth music and like a lot of metal, you know, the building blocks are the rhythm guitar and the drums. They really define it. And my theory is, you know, that I'm the mortar, the glue that glues those two things together. You know, Symphony of Destruction is probably the perfect example in the Megadeth catalog, where the riff is right, and then the drum. Then, you know, Nick came in on it. And so initially I was just kind of playing what Dave was playing. And then, you know, I thought, you know, maybe I should kind of groove with Nick here a little bit. You know, I just got to picking up the riff. So it's a combination of what the riff is as well as
weaving it out.
And that really, again, you know, that record changed, you know, a lot in certainly for Megadeth, but even in metal, you know, all of a sudden it was in the mainstream, and you could really see how you could be metal and still be gnarly with riffs and soloing and stuff and have some good playing, but you know, have it all of a sudden it's like, you know, chicks are grooving to it and dudes are heads.
So you I mean, when it's not appropriate, you pretty much don't like veer from like the guitars. But if there's a part where you can say, okay, I can do my thing here without getting in the way, you.
I mean, look at Holy Wars. Holy Wars, there is no option. You can't just go. You know, it's okay. We're all diving in together, man.
You got to double it in that.
Yeah, you have to just get in there and go. Now, there's a middle part. When we were doing the demos for that, Garth Richardson, who was the engineer at the time, who then became a pretty popular producer through the 2000s. He was the one that actually suggested, when we got to the middle breakdown part, that we create this sort of halftime bass, because the drums go to this halftime groove. He said, you know, rather than just playing along with the guitar, why don't we work on creating a bass part that was very kind of counterpoint, would pick up certain notes within the riff, and that's how that part developed. It happened with Garth during the demo process, and then as we moved along, I started thinking about, and I think probably now when we're writing songs and certainly when we're recording the bass, we go, all right, you know, there's time to jump in, riff along, play all the parts. And then there's times to kind of, you know, do the Symphony of Destruction thing. And then there's other times to make things that are kind of counterpoint. And, you know, the thing with counterpoint is you can't ever disrupt just kind of the flow of the tune. You can't counterpoint to just say, hey, I'm the bass player. Isn't this a cool part?
And just because.
Yeah, exactly. Just because is never a good enough reason.
Vocal and song is always the main element.
You know, a lot of music in certain records that I've played on over the years, it's better to, I like putting bass on after you have the basic tracks and a vocal, especially in more, you know, not metal kind of records, because then once that's there, you can actually kind of play around the vocal line a little bit. You can sort of add little licks and little kind of movements in the bass part around the vocal that will actually give the vocal a bit of a lift. You know, metal music, again, we're kind of down with the guitars and the drums, but, you know, in other types of, you know, more kind of rock type music, it's cool to have a vocal laid out, because then you know where the
I have a problem in some productions. The vocal comes too late, and then the music is not helping it.
Right.
Which is for me, I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth, but you know what? I can, so shut the fuck up. That's one of my problems with Dream Theater. That the vocal always comes as an afterthought. I've done that album with James Bree, where I knew he was gonna sing, and I wrote every single song to feature the vocal. And in Dream Theater, it always was, we write riffs, and yeah, at some point vocals are gonna be here, but they didn't write for the vocals. It was an afterthought.
Right.
And that's when that started to happen, I kind of lost interest in that whole scene and stepped away from it.
Well, you know, Yes is certainly one of the leaders of that, and there's a reason. You know, my wife listens to ELP and getting my kids into, you know, and for some reason ELP I missed that one. I just was not a band ever in my path other than what I heard on the radio when I lived in LA years back. But you know, Yes music is again very progressive, but great, tremendous. You know, vocal melodies.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a reason they're that popular.
It's not put on top of some prog stuff. It all fits together.
They're definitely writing compositions.
Yes.
You know.
I've got 3 more things.
Okay.
Number 1, we know there's a big turnover in rhythm guitar players as well. Guitar players for Megadeth.
Yeah. Unintentionally, by the way.
Well,
happened.
I don't want to know why this happened. Musicians are musicians, and some are complicated, some not. I actually just incidentally, totally on the side, got one of Marty Friedman's old guitars. I got a loaner from PRS, and they say, well, we only have the one Marty Friedman used. I'm like, I guess I use the one Marty Friedman used.
Cool.
So every single video I'm going to say, Marty Friedman.
Does it sound like Marty Friedman, or does it need him
sounds
playing?
like me playing a PRS guitar.
that's the kind of thing behind signature models is. I hate to say it because my name is on my guitar.
It's not a signature, it's just like a single cut PRS.
Yeah,
I said, I need a good single cut, and they said, okay, no, we'll send you this one. It's got a couple of dings and dongs, so, you know, just so you know, and I was expecting him to have totally, like, it's got the typical belt scratch, and that's it. So he treated it very nicely. But
like Hanger 18 didn't fall out of the guitar.
No.
Yeah.
But so do you as a bass player approach the songs and the process differently with other guitar players? I mean, Dave is writing his thing that he's always done, and he has his style, and then there's you, but then there's that extra influence that is always coming from a different perspective.
For me, it's drummers more than guitar players because I hate to call him the second guitar player, but you know, Dave being the being the primary, you know, the second or the other guitar player, you know, there's always a dynamic, you know, where Dave is, you know, got this real shoot from the hip, you know, gunslinger kind of approach, you know, that is, it's the heart and soul of the guitar work of Megadeth. And then the other guitar player has always been, whether it was Chris Poland, to Marty, to Chris Broderick, whoever it was, you know, very different juxtaposed sound, and that's the beauty of it is, you know, whereas it's funny, you listen to like Judas Priest, the thing I loved about them is that the two of them, you almost couldn't tell who was playing guitar, who was playing solo, because they're very much alike.
But here the idea is kind of to have...
Yeah, our idea, and again, kind of because the die was cast from the beginning with Chris Poland, that it was so dynamic that, you know, you kind of do anything you want till you put your first record out. And then it's kind of like you've trained your audience to this is who we are, this is what we do.
You don't need it second Dave Mustaine.
No, exactly. It wouldn't make sense. So that dichotomy is part of the charm of it all. But for me, it's the drums. You know, how a drummer plays, you know, drummers that, and I noticed it when Jimmy DeGrasso came in the band. You know, he was very even. And it was like, you know, turning a metronome on, and he was just right on it. And it took a while to adjust to it. I realized how much I played on top of the beat, ahead of the, in fact, the whole band did. And it took us a while to kind of learn to pull that back. And not entirely, but just in transitions of parts. You know, when guys play together for a long time, you develop habits, good or bad. And you don't notice them because you kind of all do them together. You know, and then all of a sudden you change one part of it, and it's like, whoa.
You got to find
now
your groove again, literally.
Yeah. So when Al Petrelli came into the group, who, like Jimmy, was really behind the beat and did a lot of studio work, so his ear was really tuned into to where.
I love his stuff.
Yeah, Al's phenomenal, you know, and that, you know, Megadeth had a very different sound during, you know, all of a sudden we got really behind the beat and it got really big and really heavy in the live show. And so, it's, again, you know, to me, drummers over the years, I think, have Chuck Beeler, who played on So Far So Good, So What, really behind the beat. Always listen to this. He'd listen to DRI and Steely Dan. So, you know,
different approach.
Yeah, very, very, you know, punk rock, but very, you know, thrashing and stuff, you know, thrash punk kind of stuff, and then like very just kind of groove and, you know, Jeff Caro kind of Steely Dan type stuff. So,
well, definitely different approach.
Yeah.
On the new album, you got Kiko. I have no idea how to say his name.
Yeah, Lorero.
We're gonna say.
I think so.
Kiko.
I asked him one day. I was like, no, just be very clear with me. The vowels, where you know, and of course he's, you know, because of his accent,
He's still dyslexic.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah.
Kiko Lorero.
Yeah.
I have only seen, I'm very honest, one video, and I saw it, and it depressed me, and I deliberately didn't click on any more of his stuff. It was like some teaching video, and he was playing arpeggios, but where everyone else would play insanely fast arpeggios, he played the same speed, but attacked every note twice. And
He's insanely good. Yeah.
Crazy what he did technically, and then there were parts that were very, very musical because they're very technical players.
Yeah.
And I can imagine if he brings that to the plate, that it would be that as a bass player or maybe even as a primary guitar player, it would definitely change the rules a bit. Because I mean, you would get someone like this for what he can do,
right.
and that you would maybe say, okay, I'll do a little bit less because it's busier. Is that happening?
You know, inside of Megadeth, you know, Dave has done a really good job of taking a lot of different guitar players and being able to craft them into the pocket of Megadeth. Because it's one thing to be this amazing shredder, you know, kind of guitar player. It's another to be able to make it what you do fit into the, you know, the sound of the group. You know, Kiko is, I mean, he's insanely great. I mean,
yes.
One of the greatest musicians I've ever played with.
Depressingly great.
Yeah.
I can only say
And it's
that
funny
way.
because he picks the guitar up and it's just so easy. I mean, it's just like, we're in the studio and he'd been there for a few days ahead of me, so he was kind of getting into some of the tunes, and he just kind of just naturally grabs things, he remembers them. And just a very natural musical ability.
What a bastard.
Yeah, no.
Seriously, come on.
with a great ear, and you know, I think people are really going to like what they're going to hear from him. He's a quick learner. He's just, you know, just his skill and natural abilities are just.
It'll most certainly be my first Megadeth album in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I'll skip the ones in the middle, but this one I'll definitely pick up if there's even a way to pick it up, because people are buckets and copy shit for free. Buckets. So that CDs are almost not available anymore. And if you do buy them, they get more expensive. And I don't really want to download it on freaking iTunes, even though iTunes is nice. I'm most certainly not going to listen to it on fucking Spotify because it doesn't pay fucking musician. Excuse me, I'm back. Okay, I'm fine.
Well said, by the way.
I'm sorry. I have 7 albums on there. I have yet to see any kind of money from it.
Yeah. No, you know, it's funny. I showed my daughter my BMI statement one day because she was getting into Spotify and all these music services, listening to, you know, artists. Taylor Swift, ironically, who I think pulled her songs from Spotify.
Yes.
And so I said, Athena, come here, I want to show you something. She comes in and I show her the BMI statement. I show her, you know, how much, you know, a song is compensated for on the radio, television, if airlines, ringtones, all the things.
Yeah.
I said, and then look at the song that was on Spotify, and it was something like 130,000 hits, and I think I got paid like $1.03. I think it was under. And she was like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." So like, you know, just not for nothing, but you know, the house we live in that is paid for by these things, you know, just kind of make, you know.
Portishead got 34 million hits, and the band, which is several people by the way, got $2,400 for 34 million hits.
Yeah, yeah.
It
And
makes
you
no
know,
sense.
That's why I have great respect for someone like Taylor Swift who can do that. And
Yes.
say, hey, you know what? That's it. I'm pulling my tunes off because you know the truth is somebody's getting rich off of it, and it's not.
It's not
And
us.
it shouldn't be on the back of the artist. And again, it comes down to that thing. Well, you know, it's music, and it's but it costs people time and money to make these things. And look, if no one's getting anything, awesome. We're all in it together.
Yeah.
But if somebody's getting something, share the wealth. You
The
know,
argument
it's
that they're telling small bands that are trying to come up is, but you're being heard. And my argument is, but if I pay for a Spotify subscription and I listen to a band that I've never heard before, I'm like, hey, this is great. They're being heard now. Then I don't go and buy the CD because I can already listen to it on Spotify. So what's my benefit as a band to get the exposure? I want to get the exposure so someone buys the album, but if they're already, it makes no sense.
Well, you know, the thing is you know, to put something out, if I or we are in a group together and we say, hey, we're going to give a song away to our fans for free so that we can get the exposure.
That's you.
That's a personal decision. Hey, you know what? We're going to sacrificial lamb. We're going to throw it
Totally
out
cool.
there.
Promo, whatever.
But when someone else takes it, makes it the sacrificial lamb, and you're right. That is now the new learning curve of the business that we're in. And you know, again, it's back to that thing about, look, we should always make music because it's what's in our heart.
Absolutely, but we gotta pay the bills too.
Yeah, of course. Well, again, you know, the thing of it is, you know, these buildings and studios and things, someone's paying for them, and it costs money to do it. And you know, that's the thing now too, because the internet's so available and digital home recording is so much more available to people. But anyone who's started to get into it, to even try to make recordings at home, you know, man, it takes a lot of time. Records don't just fall out on the floor, man. There's a lot of work.
Roughly, if you sit down and you do it hardcore, you're gonna sit there for 6 weeks if you had the songs written before, and if not, if you're still working on it in the studio, 6 months. I mean, and that costs real money.
It does.
And these bands nowadays, they have to fork over the money all by themselves. There aren't any record deals where you get like big time advances, so they come to me and they have to bring their thousands of euro by themselves, and that's dirt cheap compared to the budget you guys have. And then the deals they get are they're no deals at all. But let's not talk about that. I promised my students. Here's what's happening. I sometimes teach metalheads. Harmony, which is kind of, oh, but I can't play the riff. Yeah, but you know what key it's in? It's on the E string. Okay, thank you. Learn your freaking.
Hey, I just recorded some vocals for a band, and the guy could actually scream death metal in a harmony. I was very impressed. It was good. Yeah, it was cool.
What are they called?
A Rise in Chaos.
Okay.
Yeah, brand new group, great record. I mean, really cool riffing, and the singer was just phenomenal. And I remember this one part, I go, this is really weird, but just listening to it, can you harmonize it? We had he cleaned it up at one point. He's like, yeah, that ain't working. And then he went back to just his full-on, full death metal voice. It's like,
and it had pitch and everything.
It was awesome.
Okay,
cool.
yeah.
So it can be done. I'm following your thought here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I got these metalheads in front of me, long hair, and the nose ring with the whatever, and Peter's nipples and the jackets. And so I'm trying to teach them harmony, which is cool. They're all having like Berkeley course 1 going through stuff. And then we come to note names. I'm gonna have to explain this to Dave because he doesn't know German note names. And you guys don't know freaking German note names, except if you're German. And then you're very strict and you know what I'm talking about. So in Germany, when we go up from a note, so here we have a G, and you go up and then you add an IS. So G becomes GIS, and F becomes FIS, instead of sharp, which is, sharp is pointy, makes total sense, it goes up, pointy goes up. And then you'd have, when you go down, you have G becomes, you add an ES at the end. G becomes guess.
Guess.
F becomes E.
Who came up with that? This is how it is.
It's just ridiculous. But it gets even funnier.
Okay.
C becomes, well, underneath would technically be a B, right?
Okay.
Well, in Germany it's an H. Simply because if you don't close a lowercase b, what you get is an H. And I'm thinking it was a copying error. If you don't close a lowercase b, you have an H. Yeah. But then it gets really fucked up. C, H, and when you lower this, you don't have Hess, you don't add an ES to it, then you have B. Which means a lot of kids that learn it this way, when they see a B chord, they don't play this B, they're actually playing the German B. And this is why in my classes I only teach it with B and B flat.
Wow.
I only teach B and B
No,
flat.
that's it's sort of like when you're a pilot, English is the universal language.
Exactly.
So,
and I always tell them, how much classical or traditional German folk music are you going to play?
Yeah.
Okay, you're not. You're gonna have American songbooks, so that's how I teach it. But I always tell them, and I think it's probably true, I mean you might not know this, but that Megadeth was actually supposed to be called C. And they go like, what the fuck? And I'll say, no, it makes total sense. Because you got D, can you follow me?
Yes.
And then you lower that and you add an ES.
Okay.
Then you've got D
Yes.
and Des. And if you go one further, you got Megadeth. Right? D, Des, Megadeth. So I'm thinking, actually Dave Mustaine intended to call the band C, but then it was like, that's not metal, so how can we do this? D, Des, Megadeth. No, look, it's D.
I'm following.
And then it's
But I'm not agreeing with it.
then it's Des.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
D, Des. And then it's of course one further isn't like ultra death, it's like a mega death.
With that said, I think our lesson's over.
Mega death.
I think we're done.
D, Des, Mega death. Dave? Mega. Megan. Megadeth. D, Des, Megadeth. Dave? Okay, I guess that was Dave. It's funny.